Hi, I'm Andrew Wasson. Thanks for tuning in to my weekly guitar blog. It is Saturday, March 26th, 2011. Thanks for joining me. This is where I get a chance to answer a lot of the questions that are coming in to my guitar blog website at andrewwasson.com. And over the last week I had a fairly interesting question I'm going to save for last. It has to do with a guy named Alan from a website called backingtracksforscales.com. He's putting together a free ebook for his website. He's asking a whole bunch of guitar players on the internet a selection of 3 questions. He's going to be putting them all together in an interesting ebook idea that he's got going on. So I'm going to save those for last. But I'm going to start this time around with a question from Drew. He wrote in saying, I've been frustrated lately with some of the old patterns that I've used over and over when I solo. I feel like I'm just regurgitating licks instead of really expressing my musical ideas. I was wondering if you knew a good method for developing the ability to play the music I hear in my head on my guitar during improvisation. I've done some ear training, things like intervals, scales, and chord recognition. However, this doesn't seem to really link my ear to my instrument. Now, what caught my eye in the question at the outset there was that you are working to develop this connection between what you're hearing in your head as far as lines and then what you're getting out of the instrument. And you did say in there that you've done some work in the direction of scales and intervals and some ear training. Now, saying that you did some work is, to me, saying that you haven't done enough because I know that from most of the students I've ever taught over the last 20 years or so, and I know even from my own playing, that it takes a long time and a lot of hours, a lot of work dedicated to the scales and developing all the sides of your musical ability. And that does definitely include ear training, your scales practice, your arpeggios, things like singing your way through scales, doing transcription work. That's a huge one if you really want to tap into what you hear and get it onto the fingerboard in the shortest time possible. Transcription work is probably one of the best ones. But all that aside, let me give you what I think is pretty much the magic bullet to overall having that ability to really improvise in a natural sense. It's actually a 2-part magic bullet. The first part of it is just work that you're going to be doing at home, of course carrying on with all the scales and that kind of stuff. Just continue doing that work, just do loads and loads and loads of it. Do sequencing concepts, all that kind of stuff, arpeggios, just do loads and loads and loads of that work. It's not only great for your technique, but it's fantastic for linking your ear up to the fingerboard. But the main thing is to basically learn other people's songs. So not only the rhythm guitar and the jam through the rhythm sections, but learn the solos, and if some of them are pretty tough, learn as much as you can of that solo. But those connections that you make in listening to parts of songs, understanding exactly how those notes are fitting on the guitar fingerboard, and even possibly if you have charts, maybe if you're going to ultimateguitar.com and picking up some charts for some stuff, maybe making decisions of where to change notes. It seems that I'm always doing that with students when they're bringing charts in that they printed off on the internet and we're going through them together. I'm forever changing locations, giving them easier ways to play through lines and runs and so forth. So all that stuff is huge. Now, the other side of it has to do with performing parts live. And if you don't have a band and you can't get up on stage to do it, the next best thing is recording yourself. Come up with the tune, come up with some parts, fire up your audio software and try to put together parts and layer things and do recording. That helps immensely. Now, if you can get together a band and get up live on stage, even if you don't have a band and you can maybe make it down to some jam sessions at the local clubs, then do that. Because whether you're recording and trying to get those parts in 100% or you're live up on stage, which is even better, but you get a chance to put it all together, force yourself to really connect. And this is the real main thing here, is you're more under the gun. So you have a little bit of adrenaline flowing through you and you're trying to have everything connect and you're trying to pull off everything 100% with a little bit more pressure under you. Now, it's amazing what that pressure does. If you have a recording on your computer and you're trying to match up to that recording and do your best job possible, you've got pressure. If you're up on stage with your band and you're jamming through stuff, you've got more pressure. You've got even pressure situations when you're with a group of people and you're doing rehearsals. You know, you're trying to get your parts together as best as you can. So as you can see, a lot of it has to do with preparatory work, understanding how things fit together on the fingerboard and all that jazz. But a lot of it also has something going on with this pressure cooker situation where you're putting yourself more under the gun and you're trying to perform. A lot of neurons start firing off in your mind when you're going through that stuff. And that is, in my opinion, how you really get solid and you really get connected with what you want to say on this fingerboard, and you get better and better at doing it and actually performing all those concepts that you'll hear in your mind. So there's a lot of stuff there. There's a lot of work for you to do, and just don't get discouraged. Just work on it, and I guarantee you, if you force yourself, you know, in the next couple of years or so, you're going to see huge strides in your playing if you pursue what I'm talking about. Okay, so let's go to the next question. Now, the next question comes to us from, I hope I get the name right here, Mahir, I believe is the name, from Delhi, from India. And he wrote in saying, I watched your video about creating melodies out of various combinations of scale tones. I tried creating a solo on a 1-3-6-5 chord progression of a major scale. I started my solo on C major scale, but how do I go from major to minor? I already tried E minor, triad, and E Dorian, but it doesn't sound good to me. I don't know much about Western modes, so can you help me out? So now, that progression, the 1-3-6-5, I'm thinking that you're probably, you know, just doing the root chord C to E minor to A minor to G. So this is your chord progression. And if that's your chord progression, you are locked in to C major. You don't really need to worry too much about trying to target into any kind of modal sounds of E, you know, being, in that case, it'd actually be Phrygian though. So no kidding, your E Dorian did not work, because E Dorian would be something that would be found more coming from the structure of a D major scale. So it's not going to work on this. But let's talk about some of this. And you know, I picked this question because it makes me think also about some jam problems that students that I'll teach privately will go through when they're trying to do improvisation. And one of them is a thought of, even for the outset, with completely diatonic progressions that function within key, that they feel that, or they think rather, I should say, that they should track out and match into the certain chord of the moment. So let me give you an idea of what I mean by this. They think that, okay, C major, you know, off the C major key here, we should play C major scale. Then it travels over to E minor, and they have this thought process going on that they think they got to go into E minor, maybe playing some kind of E minor scale, or even, like, you know, they hear so much talk. You know, there's always, and even I'm guilty of it too, through videos of talking about how the important aspects are in applying arpeggios. And they are important, but you know what? They don't work that great when you're not super familiar with them. You don't have a lot of lines and chops with them. And I certainly don't normally suggest them to, let's say, intermediate and new advanced level, let's say, students that are just getting into improvisation. I just don't suggest that direction early on, because at that point you're still just trying to develop some kind of sense of phrasing and connectedness over top of a set of chord changes. And you know, those chords are just going by so fast to think through them and think, okay, I got C major, traveling over to sounds of E minor, and then A minor, you know, and then G, you know. That's a lot of tracking. I mean, that's an enormous amount of knowledge you'd have to have both on the fingerboard for your technical level to be able to track all of that. And at the same time, it's not going to be work that'll really target into, you know, just basic melody in the beginning. I mean, if you sit and compose and target out tones, and do it as more of a rote composing thing. I'm sure you could have some success with that. But what I always suggest when people are moving into improvisation and they're new to the whole world of it is to go to the scale that eliminates half steps. And you know, from me talking about that in the past, that I'm talking about pentatonic here. So if I'm trying to get new students involved in improvisation and I want them to, let's say, perhaps play something over top of a chord progression just like this one, I would highly suggest that they just track everything out in the key center, which is C major, and track it out with a C major pentatonic scale and just ride it out through there. But what I would actually try to get them to focus on is not so much of the in-position pentatonics. I would try to get them to focus more on the along the neck pentatonic scales. So that they're traveling a little bit more in a lateral sense along the neck, because I find that students who are new to improvising get a lot more mileage out of that kind of scenario rather than telling them, you know, go and practice this pattern and that pattern and stay vertical. And I find that they just, I think from moving in a much more horizontal sense, you get to actually access a little bit more of the ornamentation that's available to you on the guitar, which is primarily slides, you know, in these situations. Every time you move to a new position laterally and you're moving very horizontal like that, a lot of the movements and the strategies that you can generate can come out in terms of the ornamentations of slides, and doing embellishments like hammer-ons and pull-offs can come secondarily after that. But this is what I suggest to my personal students around here when we're getting into the world of improvisation. So hopefully that clears up the question and gives you something that you can focus on that'll really get you going on creating melodies and creating music, and begin getting you to try and start tapping into what you hear in your head. Okay, so next up, let's get to Alan's questions that he sent in for this ebook that he's putting together for his website called backingtracksforscales.com. I'm going to start off by just reading you quickly the email that was sent to me from Alan. He wrote in, very interesting to get an email like this. He said, I decided to make an ebook that is comprised of 3 question interviews that I send out to guitarists that I like and truly respect. The questions are about scales and how different guitarists think about learning new ones. I plan on making an ebook, and the ebook would be available free on my website at backingtracksforscales.com. So let's get to these questions. There's 3 of them, and we're going to start off with the first one here saying, how do you approach learning new scales? All right, so when I'm learning a new scale, the first thing that I do is I make comparisons to the standard scales that I learned in the very beginning, which of course would be the layout of major, and then, you know, down the road getting into minor. So when I'm getting into a new scale, what I'm looking at is seeing how it's different, and intervallically that is, you know, how it's different intervallically to the basic major scale primarily. That's the scale that I root everything else off of. So let's say, for instance, you know, I pretty much know most all my scales, of course, but let's say I was getting a new scale like perhaps Lydian flat 7. There's an interesting scale for you. So Lydian flat 7 scale, the first thing I would do with that scale is I would look at it and think, okay, well, what is different about this scale from standard major? And I can see right away it's got a raised 4th, and it's also got a flat 7. The next thing I do with the scale is I start thinking about what it could be used for, or possibly when it could be used in improvisation. How would I actually apply it? Or not even maybe down the direction of improvising, but perhaps how would I use it in a composition? Well, this scale in particular is kind of unique. And the thing about it is it has a flat 7 with the major 3rd, and it also has a sound of a sharp 4, or you could also say that's the same thing as a flat 5. So the first chord that comes to mind that this would be highly effective on is a dominant 7th with a flat 5. So this is the kind of work that I do initially with new scales. I look and see how it's different from standard major, and then I go and I start thinking about where it can be applied toward, and that starts giving me quite a few ideas. Now, of course, there's the rote practice work, because you got to get it into your, you know, muscle memory and burn it into your mind. But that's just mechanics. I mean, anybody can do that. It's the thought process, I think, that you're really after with your question. So now let's head over to the second question that you got here is what do you think about when you improvise? So what I'm thinking about with those scales when I'm doing improvisation is I'm trying to think about lines that can connect to whatever's going on at the moment and how I can create a sense of flow along the fingerboard. But there's sort of a two-sided coin to this for me. And the first side of it is, am I improvising in a set of changes that's locked into a key? Like for instance, a couple of questions back there, we were talking about that chord progression that went C major to E minor and A minor to G minor. Does that 1, 3, 6, 5 progression. Now, in that sense, everything's locked down. It's completely diatonic. C major scale works on top of the whole thing. So I'm quite free in just going through lots of connected ideas in C major pentatonic runs, C major scale runs. I can, of course, try and start targeting out to ideas that are dealing with the arpeggios if I wanted to. But that thing is really staying quite static in the key. So I have a little bit more flexibility of keeping my mind a bit looser in my train of thought. Now, when things are not so clear-cut, let's say you're doing a jazz tune. Let's just change up keys a little bit here. Let's say I had a chord progression that was more or less in D minor, but then there was a section of it that punched through a C sharp dominant suspended. So when I come along to the C sharp dominant suspended chord, of course, in that sense of improvising, I'm thinking much more about trying to target into that chord and doing phrases and lines and runs that I feel comfortable with. Now, in that case, that's giving me more of a mixolydian sound, so I'm coming in through mixolydian mode, and I'm trying to target out into the chord tones of the thirds and the sevenths and make some kinds of judgment calls of what I think might sound cool. Now, of course, through practice, what happens is whenever you're studying and you're trying to get your chops up, let's say, with modes and improvisation in general, you're always working on trying to build lines and come up with statements. And jazz players will be familiar with the term jazz idioms, which are basically musical statements, just like in language when you have slang terms or statements that you're using while you converse with someone. It's the same kind of thing when it comes to the world of improvisation. There's statements, and you're trying to use those statements across chord changes, and it's especially valuable when you're dealing with chord changes that don't sit in one key. When you go and leave key and you start moving around chord to chord, you kind of want to have some statements there so that every time the new situation rolls in, you've got something that you can pop in there and make a connected statement. Now, one thing that's kind of helpful for that too, I should mention, is learning arpeggios and even just thinking about the outline of a chord tone that's in a particular chord shape. So I just sort of outlined the D minor there. Let's say I change chords completely and go to B flat chord here, major 7. So the chord shape outline that I can do with some licks is coming into the outline of the shape of that chord. And that can be very valuable as well. Now, it all requires a lot of work, of course, in practice and training, but it really pays off when you get into your improvisation chops. Let's move over next to the third question, which are your top 3 most useful scales, which I find are my most top 3 useful ones. Well, because I have done a major study in my life on modes, I realized the overall importance of the major scale. And it's the fact that major scale and the relative minor, those are the main focus of most all the music of, let's say, even perhaps the last 500 or 600 years. That sound of basic major, which of course is the do, re, mi, and then of course it's offshoot natural minor, and if you're not too familiar with the minor being a relative of major, minor scales come from the 6th step. So if I'm in A major, the 6th note is F sharp. F sharp minor is the relative minor of A major. So F sharp minor is a very important sound. And you know, it's a huge color out there to most of the music that you're listening to. So major scale, and it's all of its modes, because minor is a mode of major. And the other, that's number one. Now the second most popular scale that I guess would, for me personally, would have to be the half step removed scale, which is pentatonic. So if I'm in A major, pentatonic has a second degree, it has a third degree, but no fourth, it has a fifth, it has a sixth, but no seventh. So with the elimination of those two tones, the fourth and the seventh, what we wind up with is a scale that has primarily just minor thirds and major seconds. So it works very effectively for doing any kind of sound that's very melodic, and you'll notice a lot of vocal melodies will basically be pentatonic. So I'd have to say my second most useful scale out there would be in the world of pentatonic. Now, just like major scale having a relative minor, pentatonic also has relative minor. So when you go off of A and you grab the sixth note from that, the F sharp, you have relative minor off of F sharp pentatonic. And you can hear in there I put a little passing tone in, and you give it a little bit of that bluesy sound. So pentatonics to me, when you get into blues scale, that's kind of all the same ball of wax. I know that people would debate that, but for me, I just view it that way personally. Now, you're probably wondering, well, gosh, those are pretty obvious. What on earth would be the third? Now, the third to me would have to be the forms you have as offshoots of minor. Now, if you're not familiar with those would be harmonic minor and melodic minor. Let's talk about harmonic minor first and how important that sound is, because harmonic minor is the color that you're going to be able to inject whenever you have a minor type key, and in that minor key you get either a dominant or a major chord showing up off the fifth step. That is a very popular function that happens a lot in just dozens of forms of music. You'll have that in pop tunes, that'll show up in some Spanish tunes. You'll have that in soul R&B stuff. You'll have that in metal. If you look toward players like maybe Yngwie Malmsteen, he sets up situations all the time for himself where he can inject that sound of the harmonic minor scale. But the other one that I mentioned in there was, of course, the other form of minor that we have, which is melodic minor. So harmonic minor and melodic minor, to me, they're different scales, but they are very valuable as the offshoots. So I see them as two other important forms of minor. I know what you're thinking now, holy cow, you're talking about too many scales here. But the reason why I have to include with this group the melodic minor is because that's the scale that allows me to get sounds of altered, which is another hugely important scale, the altered scale. And if you've done a little bit of jazz study, you may have perhaps heard of the concept where you would have a type of an altered chord. And I just played an A dominant 7th sharp 5 there. But you might have heard this statement before of when you have an altered chord, go up a half step and play melodic minor. You can hear the outline is really nice. So altered scale is huge, but that to me is part of the whole category of sounds of the other forms of minor. Now, just to clarify, the principal form of minor, of course, would be your natural minor, and then the other forms would be the ones I just mentioned of harmonic and melodic minor. So there you go, Alan. I hope that helps you out, and you can go into as much detail with those in your ebook as you would like. But watch out on Alan's site whenever that ebook comes out, because I'm very interested in seeing the final copy of that as well. I have lots of experience making ebooks. I know they can take a long time, so we'll just wait to hear from Alan when he gets that wrapped up. I'll make an announcement here as well for that, and do another shot in the arm of promotion for Alan's site and for that ebook that he's putting out. Well, that's about all the time that I have for today, so thanks for watching and for sending in all the great questions. And keep in mind, I now have a weekly podcast that comes out every Monday. You can find that in the podcast section on my blog site at andrewwasson.com. Until next time, take care, and we'll catch up again on my next video blog. Bye for now.